Welcome back. COVID cases remain on the rise in the United States, with the 7-day average of new cases now over 150,000. This is the highest weekly average we've had since the end of January. The increase is now accompanied by a spike among children and by a debate that comes with it over mask mandates in schools. The Republican governors of Florida, Texas, and Arizona have been actively fighting local mask mandates, but many of these school districts in those states are now deciding to defy those governors' bans. In Florida, for instance, Governor Ron DeSantis is threatening to cut school board salaries in the districts that voted for mask mandates. The U.S. Department of Education has since said the school districts may use other federal relief funds to replace that lost money. So joining me now is the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona. Dr. Cardona, welcome to Meet the Press. And I want to start with a little bit of a logistics question about this, which is, you've said that these federal funds that have already been made available can be used to do this. How does a Broward County, Florida, or an Alachua County, Florida, go about getting that money if their own governor, usually the liaison between the states and the feds, is standing in the way? Can they actually access this money?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. And first and foremost, across the country, we have children returning to school, and we're excited about that, but we have to do everything in our power to keep them safe. I spoke to the superintendents of those two communities, and I let them know that we have their back. And yes, they can draw down on the funds that were promised to them so they can safely reopen schools. Right,
but how do they get that money? I mean, you guys get, because right. It's one thing to say you're going to do it, but again, if the state legislature and the state executive are not doing it, don't they control the purse strings here?
Not really. This was approved by Congress, so they do have access to federal funds that they can draw down at any moment to make sure that schools are opening safely and that our students and staff have the confidence of returning to in-person learning. They do not have to get the green light from the governor to use these funds. They're made available to them, and I called these superintendents personally to let them know that.
All right. You have an opposite problem in the state of Illinois. There are some local school districts that want to defy the state. In this case, this is the state governor there, Governor Pritzker, issuing a statewide mandate in schools, a mask mandate. Is there something the Department of Education is going to do to school districts that defy these mandate orders?
We know what works best. The president made it very clear in his memorandum. We need to do everything in our power at the Department of Education to allow safe reopening of schools. And what we're doing at the agency is working really closely with states, with local districts, and district leaders and our health experts to make sure that the message is clear. We know what works. We shouldn't be putting students at risk. So yes, we are involving ourselves in conversations with those leaders, with those elected officials, to make sure that student safety is at the top of the list.
This week, you and President Biden seem to talk about the idea of using your Office of Civil Rights as a way to investigate some of these cases as cases of discrimination if students essentially can't protect themselves due to these bans on mask mandates. So then what's the end game here? Is this a denial of federal funds at the end of this process? If it turns out you feel as if these districts essentially discriminated against kids that wanted to stay healthy?
At the end of the day, when we talk about withholding funds, those who suffer are the students. So we want to make sure that we're communicating with them. But as you noted, we are prepared to launch investigations with our Office for Civil Rights to ensure that all students have access to this fundamental right of education. And it's sad that we're talking about this now. We're going to use our Office for Civil Rights to investigate any claims that come forward to make sure that students' rights are kept. And we're also going to ensure that the funds are available to those districts that are doing the right thing to make sure students come in safely. Withholding funds doesn't usually work. If anything, it adds insult to injury to these students who are trying to get into the classroom. And to these parents who have told me repeatedly, I just want my children back in school. That's where they learn best. I've spoken to parents of students with disabilities, and I've spoken to students. I've spoken to athletes in the last week and a half, 2 weeks in Kansas and New York. They just want to go back to school safely. Let's get politics out of the way. Let the educational leaders and health experts make the decisions around how to keep students and staff safe.
I want to put up some statistics on our vaccination rates among different age groups. For adults, it's now over 62%. But for those 16 to 17, it's at 43%. And for those 12 to 15, it's at 34%. Is there So we've talked about the penalty side of funding. How about sort of borrowing from the old race for the top idea, which is financial incentives to institutions that take federal dollars, whether in elementary schools or middle and high schools or on the higher education level? Is there an incentive program you can create to get a vaccine mandates in place?
Yes, we have been really beating that drum a lot. I mean, we've been traveling across the country, talking to governors, both Republican and Democrats, who are working with us to set up pop-up vaccination clinics in high schools. I visited one in Washington, D.C. recently. I visited one in Kansas recently. We know what works, and we're engaging educators to do this. And let me remind everyone, we have in the American Rescue Plan $130 billion available to districts to set up these vaccine clinics, to set up the testing clinics, to build confidence in our school reopening plans. We have the Return to School roadmap that has step-by-step direction on how to get this done. So it's all hands on deck. We do know vaccinations work. And in those communities where the vaccine numbers are higher, we're seeing more success. Unfortunately, in those places that they're using politics to block good practice, we're seeing hospitalizations through the roof for young children. That's unacceptable. We can control that. Let's get our kids back in school where they belong. Right,
but are you going to try to get a vaccine mandate on college campuses by basically saying if you take federal funds, you got to have a mandate on campus?
The federal government's role is very limited here. I do support efforts that are being done across the country to require vaccines on college campuses. I do support vaccine mandates in places where they're requiring staff and students to get it to go back. We don't have that authority, but I do support those efforts to keep students in school safely and prevent disruptions.
Dr. Cardona, the Secretary of Education, really appreciate you coming on and sharing the administration's perspective on this. Thank you. Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.